If you have been interested in permaculture for a little while, or maybe you've even engaged in permaculture design yourself, I'm here to remind you that gardening is only the tiniest little part of permaculture, and permaculture is actually quite political. Permaculture is both a design system and a way of thinking about how we design and respond to challenges in our communities, but it is also more of a way of life. And people often forget about this. We tend to prioritize permaculture design in terms of growing our own food and gardening, which is an important aspect of permaculture and often that kind of first step that we take. But it's really important to remember that permaculture, as it was developed and put forward by the likes of Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, is about more than that. And as somebody who has been active in the social change space for over a decade now, I work as a social impact strategist. I am this close to finalizing my PhD in communication and social change. I see permaculture as one of the most potentially revolutionary and transformative ways that we can create a positive change in our communities at a local and a global level. But in order to realize the transformative potential of permaculture, we need to be engaging with it beyond just our gardening and growing food and our homes. So in this video, I wanted to give just a little introduction and overview for anybody who might be new to permaculture, to kind of explore what permaculture is and how we can kind of think about it beyond just these frames of reference that we often see, particularly on social media when it comes to designing gardens, growing food, all of that kind of stuff. The first thing to consider when we think about what permaculture is the origins of the word. Now, there's two parts of the word. There's perma and culture. The term perma comes from permanent, and then culture being culture. And it's an alternative to agriculture, or a way of thinking about living and growing food, particularly in a way that is regenerative and more permanent. Now, if we think back throughout history, Australia's Indigenous people and Indigenous people all around the world have often lived in a way that is in alignment with the principles and the ethics of permaculture. And so while permaculture is a new way of thinking about things in the context of, late modernity, I think it's important to just recognize that even though permaculture as a system and a way of thinking is relatively new for us, as a practice and a way of life, it can be traced back millennia. The first thing to consider about permaculture is the permaculture ethics. Now, ethics are kind of like guiding frameworks or principles that tell us how we should make decisions and behave and engage in the world. So these are kind of at the core of permaculture, and there are three permaculture ethics. These are referred to today as people care, earth care, and fair share. The three ethics of permaculture, earth care, people care, and fair share, form the foundation upon which every aspect of permaculture is built. These are not optional guidelines, but they are essential aspects that underpin the design, practice, and philosophy of permaculture. Unlike specific methods or techniques, which can vary based on the context, these ethics are universal. They serve as the moral compass for decision-making, ensuring that every action in permaculture aligns with the broader goals of sustainability, equity, and regeneration. Earth care is the foundation of life. It's central to permaculture because the health of the planet directly determines the health of all living beings. People care is about cultivating thriving communities. Permaculture recognizes that sustainable systems cannot exist without healthy, thriving communities. And fair share is about balancing our needs and the Earth's limits. Fair share reminds us that the Earth's resources are finite and must be used mindfully and equitably. I really like that the principles of permaculture are kind of like general norms that we can ascribe to, and as somebody with a background in philosophy and normative ethics, I like that they can both be thought of in terms of a more deontologic approach. So we could ground our actions and the acts that we take in our day-to-day life in these principles, but we can also take a more consequentialist or utilitarian approach and consider whether the outcomes of our actions and the things that we're doing align with these ethics. So I like to think of them in terms of both a way to guide our actions and the decisions that we make, but I also like to think of them as ways of kind of assessing or measuring whether the outcomes of the things that we're doing are also ethical. Grounded in these 3 permaculture ethics are then 12 principles of permaculture. And these kind of provide a framework for how we actually do permaculture, how we actually carry out these 3 ethics. And the 12 principles of permaculture are grounded very much in design thinking and systems thinking.
Systems and design thinking begins with observation, and the first principle is observe and interact. By carefully studying the natural, social, and built environments around us, we can identify patterns, relationships, and flows. Observation allows us to understand the needs and outputs of each system element, ensuring that our designs are context-sensitive. Interaction follows as a way to test our ideas and refine them based on real-world feedback. The second principle is to catch and store energy. Systems are more resilient when they can capture and store energy in various forms, whether this is solar, water, biomass, or even social capital. In design, this means creating mechanisms that can retain energy within the system for reuse, such as rainwater harvesting, thermal mass in buildings, or community resource sharing. Stored energy ensures that systems have reserves to draw upon in times of scarcity, a key characteristic of regenerative systems. The third principle is obtain a yield. Now, every system must produce outputs that meet the needs of its components to ensure it remains viable. Yields in this context can take many forms: food, energy, knowledge, or even relationships. Systems thinking encourages designing for multiple yields by creating loops where outputs of one element can become inputs of another. Which brings us to principle 4, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. Feedback loops are essential for systems to adapt and thrive. In permaculture, a self-regulating system is designed to correct imbalances naturally. The next principle is to use renewable resources and services. Systems relying on renewable resources are going to be more sustainable and resilient. Permaculture encourages designing with solar energy, wind, biomass, and human labour while avoiding the depletion of non-renewable resources. Principle 6 is to produce no waste. In nature, waste doesn't exist. Every output is reused in some way within the system. Applying this principle to permaculture involves designing systems where waste becomes a resource, like composting organic matter or repurposing materials. Systems thinking is focused on closing loops, ensuring that resources can be cycled efficiently. Principle 7 is to design from pattern to detail. Systems thinking emphasizes recognizing overarching patterns before focusing on the specifics. In permaculture, this can involve understanding the broader climate, landscape, or community dynamics before planning individual elements. Patterns like water flow, seasonal changes, or social interactions can guide the placement and design of gardens, buildings, or governance systems. Our next principle is to integrate rather than segregate. Integration ensures that system components work together to create synergies. This principle aligns with systems thinking, which values the relationships between elements, not just elements themselves. Principle 9 is to use small and slow solutions. Small, incremental changes often lead to more sustainable outcomes than large, rapid interventions. Systems thinking values these slow solutions because they allow time for feedback and adaptation. This is important because it's small, incremental changes over time that can also lead to large social transformation. Principle 10 is to use and value diversity. Diversity strengthens systems by spreading risks and increasing opportunities for resilience. Biodiverse ecosystems are much less vulnerable to pests, diseases, or climate fluctuations. Similarly, diverse social systems are more adaptable to change. This principle applies broadly, from planting multiple crop species to fostering diverse cultural perspectives in community projects. Principle 11 is to use edges and value the marginal. Edges, which are where different systems meet, are zones of increased productivity and innovation. In nature, the edge of a forest or a riverbank is always the most biodiverse. Systems thinking recognizes the value of these transitions, designing to maximize edge effects. Finally, Principle 12 is to creatively use and respond to change. Change is inevitable in dynamic systems. Permaculture design embraces change and uses it as an opportunity for growth and improvement. Systems thinking involves recognizing patterns of change and designing for adaptability.
As a social change maker, I find the 12 principles of permaculture particularly useful because they provide us with a set of principles that can help us to build our change-making toolkit. They allow us to develop specific skills or areas of knowledge that are particularly useful not only in living a life in alignment with the principles of permaculture, but just in terms of our work across the social change space more generally. I'm going to be doing a series on my YouTube channel where I dive into each of the 12 permaculture principles and how we can apply them in our own personal lives, but also more generally to the work across the social change space that you might be doing. So if that's something that interests you, definitely check out that series. It'll be linked in the description below. So while the ethics of permaculture kind of provide us with a set of frames of reference for determining what a good life might look like and how we ought to make decisions morally within the context of permaculture and living that kind of lifestyle. And the principles then provide us with kind of more practical tools, ways of thinking or ways of engaging with the world. Then this brings us to the third kind of core component of permaculture, and that is the permaculture flower. Now, the permaculture flower kind of provides an overview of the different realms or aspects of society and the ways that we engage in the wider world that we can apply permaculture to. So this is the part that I think is most often overlooked. We begin the permaculture flower by looking at land stewardship, and this is where a lot of the focus on permaculture tends to be. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think that for most of us in the Western world and those of us who are living in suburban areas, which I think makes up the majority of people, at least here in Australia, we have some kind of a relationship with our local environment. I live in a small house in the southeast of Queensland and I have my own backyard. You know, there are public spaces that I engage in, and most people have that kind of relationship. And so that provides a really great starting point for how we can begin to apply the principles of permaculture and live more sustainably and in alignment with those permaculture ethics. Where I think we tend to fall short is when we only focus on the land around us, the food that we're growing, and we don't consider how the principles of permaculture and these ethics extend beyond our gardens or green spaces. So the other aspects of the permaculture flower
include building, tools and technology, education and culture, health and spiritual well-being, finances and economics, and land tenure and community governance. So the first of these is the one that we probably think of most when we think about permaculture, and that is land and nature stewardship. So this domain really emphasizes nurturing ecosystems and sustainably managing all of our natural resources. The thing I love about permaculture is it doesn't advocate for a single solution, but rather it can include a variety of approaches that work as long as we are living in alignment with those permaculture ethics and principles. So this can consider anything from natural farming to biointensive gardening, forest gardening, holistic management of land, agroforestry, or even wild harvesting. In the building domain, sustainability encompasses any of the materials, the designs, and the processes that we use in the ways that we construct our communities. So this can include things like passive solar design, earth-sheltered construction, water harvesting, or our management of waste, any kind of disaster-resistant construction, and any approaches that kind of ensure human habitats can remain resilient, resource efficient, and in tune with the natural environment. Then we have tools and technology, and this domain focuses on any of the technology that can complement natural systems and support us in sustainable lifestyles. This can look at how we reuse and recycle resources, any cooking technologies, how we get energy from microhydration or small-scale wind power, and it also looks at transition engineering, so how we can actually shift away from our current fossil fuel dependency. By integrating appropriate tools and technologies, permaculture supports the transition to a more sustainable future. The next domain is education and culture, and transformative education and cultural practices are vital for fostering more resilient communities. This can look at alternative schooling and education practices, but also considers participatory arts and music, anything from social ecology to the way we conduct research in large institutions, and of course, transition culture, which emphasizes localization and resilience in response to global challenges. Then we have the domain of health and spiritual well-being, and permaculture emphasizes holistic health, connecting physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. This can encompass anything from birthing and breastfeeding practices to medicines, integrating traditional and holistic practices with contemporary science-based research. It looks at things like yoga and Tai Chi, the spirit of place and connection that we have to land, and of course, Indigenous cultural revivals, so how we value and utilize traditional knowledge to enhance our spiritual and ecological understandings of the world. The domain of finance and economics is also very important. Regenerative economic models can support ethical wealth distribution and local resilience. This can encompass considering things like local currencies or barter systems, mutual aid programs, ethical investments and fair trade, any farmers markets and community-supported agricultural programs, networks like woofing, and of course tradable energy quotas. Finally, we have land tenure and community governance. So this domain focuses on creating collaborative systems for managing land and resources. It considers things like cooperatives and co-housing models, native title and traditional usage rights, consensus decision-making, things like sociocracy, and open space technology. These government systems are really important because they're going to encourage collective responsibility and equitable resource management.
So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview and a nice introduction to what permaculture is in terms of an epistemological framework, a way of thinking about the world and how we engage in the world. I love permaculture. Like I mentioned, I think that permaculture really has a potential to be the gateway to creating the world that I think a lot of us as social change makers want to create, but only if we recognize that permaculture is more political than just gardening. If you like this video and you like the things that I talk about, if you're interested in not just learning about permaculture design, but also the systems thinking tools and frameworks that kind of underpin a lot of permaculture, definitely subscribe to my channel, check out more of my videos. I am a systems thinking practitioner. I have a completely free introduction to systems thinking training for social change makers, which I will link below. I'm really passionate about systems thinking because it provides us with a way of not only thinking about complex phenomena, but it just changes the way that we engage with the world, and it changes our worldview as a whole. So I'm very passionate about systems thinking, and I have lots more videos that look at systems thinking tools through the lens of permaculture. So definitely check those out, and thank you so much for watching this video.